Hello, in this replay I have in this video I have a replay for you in one of my favourite ships, the Tenryu, which is the Tier 3 Japanese light cruiser. I'm going to say this is one of my favourite ships. It's probably actually my second favourite ship in the game, and it's just that this is a very good all-round ship. It's fast. 33 knots is its top speed. It does actually lose a lot of speed in turns, but in a straight line it's very fast. It's quite agile, it's got a quick rate of shift time, and turns fairly tightly. As the only real disadvantage with its manoeuvrability is that it loses speed in turns, but it's sufficient that it can dodge incoming shells pretty easily. It's got a long range on its main armament, over 11 kilometers I believe, which at Tier 3 actually gives you a lot of options in terms of how you can engage your enemies, and its high explosive shells are very powerful, most notably in that they've got a 10% fire chance per hit, and on top of all that this ship has torpedoes. So yes, it's a very good ship. The only real... it's got two big weaknesses. The first is that it's actually only got 4 guns, so while individually they are good, it just takes a long time to kill your enemies. And the other big downside of the Tenryu is that if you let your enemies shoot you in the broadside, they will probably citadel you if they are firing armor piercing, and they will kill you. So it's quite a fragile ship. It doesn't have a lot of hit points either. So we see we're on Big Race, and it's in encounter map mode. I've kind of come along here escorting my battleships. There aren't any aircraft carriers, but it's still best to hang around them because they'll have a lot more fire support they can add, which just helps you out a lot if you are in a situation where you need, fire. Just because the Tenryu doesn't actually have a very powerful broadside. Like I said, they've already done just under 3,000 damage to this Phoenix, and the rate of fire on these guns is sufficient that the damage actually adds up pretty quickly, especially if you start a fire, or 2 or 3. I also mentioned that the Kuma, the Tier 4 ship that follows on from the Tenryu, is my favourite ship in the game, because it's basically just the Tenryu that's got more guns and it's faster. So that's one of the big weaknesses of the ship that gets eliminated basically, moving up from Tier 3 to Tier 4. And more speed's always good. Well, I've managed to set that Phoenix on fire, and well, it puts it out, which means that right about now is about the time I want to start a second fire if I can. But you can kind of see the accuracy of the guns here. I'm firing four guns on the broadside, and I've got 2 hits, 1 hit. Basically, so long as your enemy keeps travelling in a straight line, once you've started hitting them, you will actually keep hitting them again and again and again with probably at least half the shells you fire. Someone set fire to that Phoenix. Wasn't me though. One thing is that the turrets on the Tenryu, they turn alright to keep up with the manoeuvring, but they take a while to swing around on the broadside you saw just there, so I've only just managed to bring my full broadside to bear, and unfortunately I'm missing this Phoenix. It should also be noted that, well, the enemy team have kind of pushed in and are doing what they're supposed to do and trying to take the cap circle. My team for some reason is all going around it, and basically this whole game the enemy's going to be in control of the cap and we're going to be decapping them the whole time. Switch fire to a Wyoming because the Phoenix has gone behind the island, so I can't shoot at it. But it's about to come back out the other side, and I want to finish this guy off just because it is on low health. Someone's gone and wrecked its engines. I did start another fire on it, which might be that one burning there. But I'm doing a little bit of damage now. I think the Phoenix has taken so much damage that high explosive shells just aren't going to be that effective anymore. And I'm only barely actually getting hits on here. It's turned bow onto me, which is presenting a pretty small target. But the hits are still adding up. 2 hits from that broadside. Not a lot of damage though. Another 2 hits, but it looked like one of them actually bounced off. I was firing armor piercing, that would be why. The armor piercing on the Tenryu, it's pretty good, but you've got to actually be in pretty close to use it effectively, and the enemies have to be broadside onto you. It's just, they're only 140mm cannons, so the shells just aren't that powerful. So you really have to have them firing on a flat arc into a flat surface before you can hope to really do any damage. I'm coming around to fire some torpedoes in at this battleship. It's basically at the maximum range of my torpedoes here, but it's coming towards me, so hopefully they'll hit. I actually don't use the torpedoes on the Tenryu all that often. I prefer to stay off at fairly long range where I'll have a lot of time to dodge enemy shellfire. But you see, I'm using my guns to try and do a bit more damage to Wyoming, but it turns out it was completely unnecessary. My team absolutely wreck it. The ship I should be shooting at is this Clemson, which, well, it's the only one in the cap circle at the moment. Actually, I think that battleship's just about to cross in, the Kawachi you see behind it there. But this range, it's just a bit unlikely that I'm actually going to hit the Clemson. I still decided to take my chances anyway. And then with this St. Louis here becomes a bigger threat. It's actually far too close to St. Louis. The way to beat a St. Louis if you're in a Tenryu is to hang back at range, because of course you're faster than it and you've got longer range. So you can basically choose what range the engagement will happen in, and basically just choose one where it can't shoot back at you. I managed to set the St. Louis on fire, and it doesn't look like it's able to put the fire out immediately, so I'm going to get a fair bit of damage from that one burning. But because of the high fire chance of these guns, I've actually managed to start a second fire, and this St. Louis is actually losing health pretty quickly. I believe I'm at around the maximum range of this St. Louis, so I'm actually broadside onto it, or basically broadside onto it, and firing away, but the enemy Karlsruhe has well appeared, and I know that's actually got the range to deal with me. If anything, it outranges me. So I've got to start turning away. The Tenryu's actually got fairly good firing arcs to the rear, so you can actually almost sail directly away from your enemies and continue firing at them. Overturn a little bit there, but that's basically the angle you want. Just look on the mini-map, or whatever that diagram in the bottom left corner is, you'll see that I'm actually angled pretty far away and almost directly running away from that St. Louis. But I switch fire to the Karlsruhe since it is clearly a threat to me at this point. And the next few moments of this game are actually going to be, well, quite stupid on my part. This engagement between myself and the Karlsruhe is actually very indecisive. It barely hits me and I barely hit it, but the whole time I'm actually getting further away from the cap circle, which the enemy are still in the process of capping. And unfortunately, the enemy actually outnumber us at this point, so we really need to get all of our ships up there and together. And well, I've realised at this point, I've decided I'm going to have to basically kill this Karlsruhe quickly, which means closing in to short range to use my torpedoes and armour-piercing shells. Just keeping up wiggling a bit as I close in, just to try and avoid taking as much damage as I can, but soon enough it's going to be a bit pointless, since, well, it'll be close enough that I won't have time to dodge its shells before they arrive. I've switched to armour piercing now, because we're within about 7 kilometres. It's fairly well angled to me though, but I'm just not getting any hits yet. Well, here we go, it's turned broadside on, get one Citadel hit, one regular hit, fire off my next two. Nope, they both miss, and I take a Citadel hit, it looks like there as well. But oh, I'm just not quite getting the hit I need here. Getting over penetrations and more over penetrations, and there's the kill. So I did manage to fill off that Karlsruhe, but I lost about 6,000 hit points doing so. Well, probably actually nearer to 7,000 hit points doing so. But still, it took down a tier 4 cruiser with armour-piercing shells, and it was mostly with my armour-piercing shells. So nothing to complain about. I fired my torpedoes at this Kawachi. Its guns are actually all pointing at me, but for some reason it doesn't shoot at me. I'm assuming it's actually seen my torpedoes launch, because it starts turning away pretty well immediately as I do so. I turn bow onto it because I'm expecting its shells to fire at me, but I decide that, well, it's obviously not going to, so I start turning broadside back on, or back broadside onto it to start getting my other gun turrets to fire. And here comes its shells, so luckily I managed to dodge them, but that battleship player, I don't know why it held its shot for so long, but it did time it pretty alright. And I'm actually not shooting very well against this Kawachi. I really should have done better here, but I'm aiming for the superstructure of the Kawachi, which is actually really hard to hit since it's got, well, those gun turrets in the way, and it's a fairly small target to start with. And quite a few of my shells are actually dipping down and hitting the armoured belt and not doing any damage at all. I really should be aiming for the bow or the stern of the Kawachi, since that is poorly armoured and I'll be able to hit there nice and easy. You saw me take a broadside from the Kawachi there. I took a lot of damage, but I also got my torpedoes off at it. Basically I saw that it looked like it was going to run aground, so I could have a reasonable guess at where it was going to be. But I'm behind the island now. Oh, I got one torpedo hit on the Kawachi. I'm firing away at the St. Louis. It might be the same one as earlier. Actually, I think it probably is the same one as earlier, so finishing off a bit of my work from earlier. And see again, at this range it can't retaliate at me, and because it's going in a nice straight line, I'm just able to consistently land a few shots on it. And sooner or later, I'm going to start a fire. And the St. Louis is, well, there you go, there's the fire started. St. Louis, it has so few hit points left that if that fire burns, that will be sufficient to kill it. Now I'm going to, well, my intention is to actually just charge straight into the cap circle and torpedo that battleship. My team's actually managed to turn this around. We still haven't actually gone into the cap circle to contest it, but well, as you can see, we've basically gone right around the edge of it without going into it. And in the process we've managed to kill a lot of enemy ships, so we've actually got the numerical advantage now. We've just got to prevent the enemy from capping, and unfortunately they're getting quite close to it. They're already more than halfway towards capturing the zone. I think the St. Louis actually put out my fire, but another fire is burning on it. And the Tenryu is actually a fairly stealthy ship, so I won't get spotted now so long as I don't fire my guns. So I just let that St. Louis burn to death. I should also mention that I was originally going around the right side of the island, but then something spotted me. So when I was unspotted, I came around the left side of the island, hoping that this battleship would be facing the other direction and I'd be able to get some torpedoes into its back. Well, it kind of worked. The battleship's stern onto me, so my torpedoes are going to have a hard time hitting this. But fortunately, its guns are all pointing off on that other channel where I was, well, originally intending to come around. I start turning away from it because I do not want to be this close to a battleship when its guns are pointing my direction. Unfortunately, it starts turning in the direction where I fired my torpedoes, but it also obviously slows down so it avoids them. And again, I'm shooting the wrong spot. I'm aiming for the middle of the Kawachi when I should be aiming for the bow and stern where the arm is thinner. But I do manage to avoid its return fire and I'm able to keep firing away. And the Kawachi starts reversing, so I actually get a few shots in where they should all be going, and they basically all do 792 damage. Which would be nice if I was actually doing that consistently, but for some reason I just wasn't thinking about it at that time, and I'm continuing to just fire against the Kawachi's thickest armour. Anyway, I have managed to start a fire. I fire off some torpedoes, but I fired them on the assumption that the Kawachi is going to stop reversing at some point and start going forward, but that assumption was incorrect. Again, I managed to avoid its return fire, and again I actually managed to start a second fire, and I put some shots into the bow. So with those two fires, that's... oh no, it just put them out. If they had have continued burning, that would have done a lot of damage. But now would be a good time to start another fire, because if I do start another one now, it's going to burn for the full duration of its effect. At the range I'm at, the Kawachi's actually got a pretty low chance of hitting me. My torpedoes also have no chance of hitting it though, but in a gunnery duel, Tenryu's actually got a pretty good chance at this range, so long as I don't turn broadside on. Well, someone started a fire on that Kawachi, which means it's probably going to burn to death. Not sure if that was me or not, I wasn't really paying attention. But I'm still just continuing to land shells on it. I basically want it out of the game as quickly as possible. No, we've only got 5 minutes and I just started another fire on that Kawachi, which means that it's basically doomed. But I've come around behind this island, so I'm going to stop firing at it for now, and it will burn to death. Instead, I switch fire to this Clemson in front of me, which is the last remaining enemy ship. I fire off 2 shots, or 3 shots, but it's going to go behind the island, so I'm not going to get a chance. But it dies before any of my shells land, and there's that battleship burning to death. So, that was a decent game of the Tenryu. 155 hits with my guns and 1 torpedo on target, sunk 2 enemy ships, started 10 fires and got 1 citadel hit. And just those stats, they kind of show you the flexibility of the Tenryu. Like, I got citadel hits, I got fires, I got torpedo hits. And I did, well, a lot of damage. 16,000 with fire, 45,000 with high explosive, a few thousand with flooding, torpedoes, and armor-piercing shells. Actually, I did more damage with my flooding than I did with my torpedoes. So that was actually a single very effective torpedo against that battleship. Did, what's that, 15,000 damage? So, I mean, well, actually if you add this all up, that's like an 80,000 damage game in a tier 3 ship. So no wonder I did so well on it, and well, just the flexibility that you can have games like this where basically in any situation there is something the Tenryu can do to help you win, and that's what I really like about this ship. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.